Call of Duty franchise, as we know it, is at a turning point. $69 billion was just spent by Microsoft to acquire Activision Blizzard, with around half of that being for the Call of Duty franchise. This acquisition means that people who have been nothing but a stain on the franchise and industry as a whole, like Bobby, are finally out of the picture. But sadly, it also means that countless people who were essential to the success and creation of the franchise have been leaving and getting laid off en masse.
You're all fired.
But this also isn't something that's only been happening since the Microsoft acquisition. In fact, it's been happening for the last decade, with more important people like David Vonderhaar and Jason Blundell leaving pretty recently, and countless more over the years like Vince Zampella and Jason West, and a pretty large chunk of the original Infinity Ward team that left when that whole fiasco with Activision over unpaid royalties went down around the beginning of development for the original Modern Warfare 3. And all of this has now culminated with the Microsoft acquisition, which resulted in an even bigger portion of the people working on the franchise being laid off, which leaves us with barely any people still working on Call of Duty who were responsible for it in the first place. This, coupled with the fact that Microsoft obviously has its own plans for the future of the franchise, and the fact that it's also been in an awful state and on a steady decline for the last decade. I can't help but to feel like the future of this franchise is currently more uncertain than it's ever been. And things aren't exactly looking good for the future of the Call of Duty franchise. So since this whole situation pretty much marks the end of an era for Activision and the Call of Duty franchise, I felt like talking about the state of Call of Duty and everything that's happened to it leading up to the turning point we're currently at, as things will likely be a bit different moving forward into this new era under Microsoft, which is made pretty clear by just looking at other franchises that got the Microsoft treatment after being acquired by them. Just a quick warning before we proceed with this video, this is my first ever commentary video, as you could probably already tell, and also this video is mostly opinion based, coming from someone who's pretty jaded towards Activision and the Call of Duty franchise. Anyways, please bear with me as I go on this incoherent, schizophrenic rant about the past, present, and uncertain future of Activision and the Call of Duty franchise. As we all know, the state of Call of Duty isn't exactly great.
No 8-minute speech like last year, but fun fact, my speech was actually longer than this year's Call of Duty campaign. What?
But despite all the backlash, heavy criticism, and declining player numbers, and just general not-so-great state Call of Duty has been in for the past 10 years or so, basically since the release of Ghosts.
That is a new dog model right there. That's a fucking new dog model, bro.
Which kind of marked the end of the golden era. Modern entries in the franchise have been raking in more cash than ever and breaking record sales. And a prime example of this is that awful Modern Warfare 2 reboot that literally nostalgia baited its way to outselling the titans of the franchise like the original Modern Warfare 2 and Black Ops 2, which previously held those titles of most sold Call of Duties because they actually earned it, because they were good games that millions of people actually enjoyed.
Okay, guys, tell me again. Now, which one do I press to shoot now? Damn it. Ah, crap.
So they did deserve those sales numbers.
Money.
But on the other hand, I don't really feel like the Modern Warfare 2 reboot really deserves to be one of the most sold Call of Duty titles of all time. But why exactly is a game that has overwhelmingly negative reviews and represents everything wrong with modern Call of Duty breaking record sales? Well, the answer is Activision is just good at what they do. And by that I mean they're good at manipulating their player base into thinking that their game will somehow be good again and marketing it as such. But this is also something we've seen happen in pretty much every industry for every franchise that's gotten this popular and built up a name thanks to a history of actual good products.
First time?
which has subsequently ended up falling into the same trap over time of becoming too greedy and out of touch, and the people in charge of it focusing more on making their shareholders happy and trying to maintain relevance, while also squeezing every single dime they can get out of their product by copying what's popular, and as a result, becoming too scared to innovate on their own stuff, which literally got them to where they are in the first place. Call of Duty, like many other franchises at its level, has simply become too convoluted. After 20 years of production, most of the core people who started the franchise and knew what was best for it have left or been laid off and been replaced by people who don't know much about the franchise and basically just get told what to do by greedy, out-of-touch executives, which as a pretty obvious result has led to the loss of the sense of direction the franchise once had.
Playtime is over when Nikki drops in.
And it's also led to the fear of creativity and innovation.
It's a Frankenstein monster stitched together from bits and pieces of previous games, repackaged and sold to us at full price. All the content at launch was recycled.
And this decline in originality and creativity in the Call of Duty franchise has been cemented with the fact that copying business models from successful competitors like Overwatch, Apex,
Yeah, shoot now. I'm cheating.
and
Fortnite.
has simply been more profitable.
Money!
Which has only further validated the awful, greedy, out-of-touch decisions that these executives have been making, that has resulted in them desecrating their franchise and losing touch with what made their product so special to so many in the first place. The franchise has unsurprisingly sharply declined in quality and substance year after year, alienating a large portion of the community that literally helped them get to this point in the first place, and simultaneously becoming just another soulless cash cow and a shell of what it once was. And another result of this is Call of Duty basically losing its identity, from the atmosphere and aesthetic to the maps to the iconic soundtracks. Memorable characters,
During the German occupation, the sound of his violin filled the air.
Death to the MPLA!
Yeah. Well, let's see if we live to see it.
What's your name?
Fuck you.
Where were you born?
Kiss my ass.
and great gameplay feel.
Enemy sound detected. Our UAVs online. Dead silent.
And so much more. The only thing you'll really find in modern titles is soulless, recycled content from the days when the game actually innovated, which are also buried under a mountain of awful and predatory business practices and features nobody asked for. There's a reason why most of the decent content in modern Call of Duty titles is recycled and remastered content from when they actually used to innovate, and the people who understood Call of Duty and its direction were still working on the franchise. Modern Call of Duty is so far gone that they don't know how to continue on what they perfected over a decade ago. So they just resort to recycling for the sake of banking on nostalgia, hoping it keeps their new title alive for a year at best so that they can sell more microtransactions. And I also feel that it's because they don't really know how to make anything good anymore, and most likely don't even care to, because copying and recycling has made more money than learning from their mistakes in their past and what made their franchise so great, and improving on it and evolving in a way that makes sense over time, like you'd kind of expect from any respectable company that's been making the same thing for over 20 years now. But regardless, even if a lot of key players who are responsible for Call of Duty in the first place aren't around anymore, all they had to do was slightly improve on what was already there. But for some god-awful reason, they've decided to go in every direction but the one that made their product great in the first place. And a great example of a company that actually stayed true to itself and properly evolved over time and maintained its direction and identity is a little German car company you may have heard of called Porsche. They basically embody this approach, and they make the same thing pretty much every other year, but they respect their heritage and improve their product in the right ways, ending up with basically a perfected product that is universally praised and respected for staying true to what they are and doing it amazingly. Another example in gaming would be Counter-Strike. They have also done this, and basically been the same game for longer than Call of Duty has even been a thing for. And they've maintained their legacy and maintained what made their game great and improved upon it over time. Even with the abysmal release of Counter-Strike 2, it's still Counter-Strike, and it does it so well. And despite that, the people in charge of the Call of Duty franchise somehow still don't seem to grasp that concept, and are instead pretty brain dead and money hungry about it, when they quite literally could have made more money and not turned their franchise into a complete joke if they just did those simple things, consisting of staying true to what made their games great in the first place and building on them in a way that made sense. But instead, all you see is them trying to move away from what made Call of Duty somewhat of a respectable franchise in the first place, instead of continuing to innovate on what they got right. There's a reason why such a small community project like SM2 receives so much hype, because those people simply took everything that made Call of Duty that fun, iconic arcade shooter and threw it all together, and is something that Call of Duty could have easily done. In fact, they've already done it with the China exclusive COD Online. But despite that, they somehow still refuse to give us something like that, even after saying they would, which obviously turned out to be a lie, and instead we got the Modern Warfare 3 reboot, which is basically just Modern Warfare 2019 Part 3 with slightly better maps and gunplay than Part 2. Which, I mean, what do I expect from Call of Duty nowadays? Personally, I gladly would have dumped thousands of hours and dollars into something like Project SM2 or a North American version of COD Online. But instead, they shut down Project SM2 and continue to release half-baked, unfinished, soulless garbage year after year, for full price, by the way. So instead, when I feel like playing Call of Duty, I'm forced to go back to play the games that I've already been playing for the past decade, which I don't mind because they're actually good and I still enjoy them. But what I won't be doing is playing and buying whatever new soulless $70 200 gigabyte
COD's 200 gig? Get out of here.
Pile of dog shit they released that has a 6-month life cycle and was just freshly rolled off the Activision sweatshop conveyor belt, that somehow lacks the completeness of games that came out a decade before it, despite having more resources to make the game than ever before. Modern titles are quite literally everything but memorable and worthwhile, unlike the old games spanning from Call of Duty 1 all the way up to Black Ops 2, and are still somehow replayable till this day. And not to mention, much more worthwhile and memorable than the current Call of Duties are, and probably will ever be. These games were complete package experiences, and we haven't really gotten anything like that pretty much since the release of Black Ops 2. The only decent thing they've pumped out in the last 10 years of Call of Duty was Warzone 1, which they then went on to ruin, like they do with everything. And listen, I understand the people who are new to the series and haven't really experienced the old COD games and do enjoy the new ones, because objectively, these are just arcade shooters made by a AAA studio that do have this formula pretty down pat. And a Call of Duty game, no matter how bad it is in comparison to its predecessors, will always objectively be somewhat of a fun video game. And that's because they have production value, just like movies that are on their 10th reboot. And if you're just a casual player who hops on for an hour or two here and there, the game obviously will be somewhat enjoyable. But I can guarantee that if you're someone who's played at least 3 to 4 entries in this franchise and actually put a decent amount of time into these games and actually grinded them, you most likely don't really enjoy these games anymore, and probably just play to play, which is something that wasn't really a thing in the original titles, at least as much as it is now. There is no real substance in the modern Call of Duty games, and their replay value and life cycles are shorter than ever, unlike the titles that literally put them on the map. And these games, despite being older than most people watching this video and basically being borderline unplayable, are still more alive than a lot of recent titles, which is kind of insane. And I think think that really speaks volumes about the current state of the Call of Duty franchise. Those older titles are infested with miserable losers who just don't want you to have fun, or kids who just got their hands on their first mod menu and actually somehow enjoy ruining other people's experiences. And not to mention the countless exploits that still haven't been fixed and probably never will be, that literally put you at risk while playing these games. For example, when playing these games, there's a chance that you could get hit offline, deranked, or even get your PC ratted, which has actually happened to quite a few content creators who are targeted by these people who get a kick out of harassing them and making them unable to even play these games anymore. I don't really get it, but I guess they just like seeing other people be miserable just like they are. So most people nowadays don't really want to run the risk of things like that happening to them just because they want to relive some of that sweet nostalgia, or maybe even experience these games for the first time, which really sucks because the new games aren't that great and the older titles are pretty timeless and still really fun to play. So the fact that you're at a risk of these things happening to you just for wanting to play them deters a lot of people from even going back to these older Call of Duties or even attempting to play these games for the first time, which really sucks because they genuinely are fun games to play that deserve to continue to be played and maintained to this day. Now, I know there are community servers that you can play on and community clients like Plutonium and rest in peace IW4X, but due to these clients not being on console, which is where most people that play these games reside, a lot of these older games that would have otherwise still had large thriving communities on them are now dying off because Activision refuses to fix the exploits in these games. Also, I don't know too much about these exploits, but this guy made a really good video about it, which I suggest you to check out if you want to learn more about what you could be at risk of when playing these older Call of Duties on PC or console. But despite everything, they still haven't slowed down on the development and release cycles despite saying they would, which is obviously unsurprising. I mean, why would you not continue business as usual, milking the franchise dry with sequel after sequel and soulless remasters and reboots and shameless attempts to capitalize on nostalgia in all the wrong ways, of course, instead of making an actual good game or good remasters that aren't just cash grabs and riddling them with microtransactions that will be worthless and obsolete in a few months when people keep buying them. They literally have an infinite money glitch. So why would you not continue serving low effort, disappointing slop to people if they keep paying you top dollar for it? And that has also led to them being pretty content with these fast food level releases because they're printing hundreds of millions of dollars. Why the hell would you make a good game that people would stick to for more than a year? Who cares if every title is worse than something that came out a decade ago? The shareholders love it, and that's all that matters to them. But in all seriousness, the way they've set this up honestly makes it feel kind of pointless to even talk about, because they win no matter what, and they've been winning no matter what, clearly. They can get away with continuing to sell slop for top dollar, and if they want people to come back, all they have to do is recycle something iconic from the past, like they've already done 20 times, because it'll always work. It makes me feel insane to expect a bit better from a franchise that's virtually been doing the same thing for over a decade now. And the reality is, the franchise people like me grew up on is long gone because it's simply less profitable to make games like that anymore. And ultimately, that's the goal. And they don't have to give people what they want or build on what made their games good in the first place and properly evolve as Call of Duty games, because delivering disappointing games focused on monetization year after year is what these out-of-touch higher-ups think is what's best for business.
Call of Duty's new Godzilla x King Kong Beast Glove costs $80 worth of in-game points. That is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever seen.
But regardless of that, I still genuinely don't get how they are this stupid. I mean, I understand that they're out of touch and they don't really care about any of this stuff, but they've been doing this for so long, and they still haven't realized that it would simply be more profitable to make good, well-rounded games that are done right and feel worthwhile to spend money and time on. Who would have thought? But then again, I guess it's pretty difficult for them to realize that when people keep buying their 200 gigabyte piles of dog shit that prioritize manipulating players into spending more money over actually enjoying what they're playing. Another thing that's pretty funny about the current state of this franchise is that they're particularly great at innovating and creating good features and fixing problems, and then subsequently ruining those good features and overcomplicating them and breaking what they fixed, almost like they're manufacturing problems. just to waste time until the next release, instead of actually patching and fixing and updating the game into a state that it honestly should have been during release, which is a pretty common theme that I've seen across almost every recent Call of Duty title. And I think that's because these games are now half live service games, because you still pay $70 for them. But now that you can update them over time, they just get rushed out. By the time they actually get patched and fixed into a decent state, that, by the way, it should have been like that at release, we're already getting the next game. But then again, that is some conspiracy level shit that I don't really want to get too into, because I probably already sound mentally unwell enough in this video, so I'm just gonna move on from that topic. However, it genuinely is impressive how good they are at making pointless changes that nobody asked for and nobody wanted and nobody cares about. I don't understand the game design philosophy Call of Duty has been following for the past decade. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But then again, this franchise doesn't make any sense anymore. And it's at the point where these games would literally be better off just being the exact same, instead of changing anything and just slightly tweaking things over time, kind of like how Counter-Strike does it, instead of what they do now, which is also basically making the same thing but somehow making it worse every time. And I know I'm just some guy that knows nothing about game design yelling at a piece of plastic in his room, but Call of Duty isn't that complicated of a game. It's not some MMO with tons of depth that requires a bunch of balancing. It's an arcade shooter. In fact, it's the quintessential basic arcade shooter. But they keep trying to complicate this game in the most convoluted and dumb ways possible that nobody wants. And I also think that it's pretty ironic that their target demographic that they try to pander to so much and also protect in their games and appeal to is the most casual audience possible. Yet they try to overcomplicate these games in ways that I'm pretty sure most of these people don't care for and also don't want. Which is pretty funny, but also pretty sad. But mostly funny once you stop caring about the franchise and don't really care to see it do well anymore, because they've done this to themselves. This franchise simply fails to do the logical thing of building on what people actually enjoyed time and time again, because they're so focused on trying their hardest to be something that they're not. And because of that, they ignore what they did right and what made their game special and worthwhile to so many in the first place, and instead focus on copying dumbass features from other games that nobody asked for and nobody wants in a Call of Duty game. And as if that wasn't already bad enough, they absolutely adore amping up monetization in this game to the point where every aspect of this game is hyper monetized, almost like it's a damn mobile game. I swear you could take the memory that these extra cutscenes and bullshit and bloat in this game that it doesn't need, that is just there for you to buy and look at microtransactions, you could take that space and fit another 3 or 4 previous Call of Duties in there. Why does a Call of Duty game need to be 200 gigabytes? Black Ops 2 is like 30. All DLCs included. Now, a lot of these features in current Call of Duties are literally made to just make the player feel like they need to buy cosmetics. I'm pretty sure there's even features now or systems in matchmaking that put new players into lobbies with the credit card whales that have all the flashy shit, and it makes them feel like they need to buy something. Is smart business-wise, but that is so vile. Like, come on. If you just made actual good content and good cosmetics that people wanted to buy, you wouldn't have to pull such scummy tactics to get people to buy your shitty cosmetics. Man, God, jeez, Activision fucking sucks, man. Like, I'm jaded about this franchise, but the more I've researched for this video and the more I've read and heard and seen, really just makes me not want to ever play this franchise ever again. And I hate that, because I like Call of Duty. Wow, they suck. And now that it's Microsoft, I don't think there's any hope for this shit. I think we're way past that point now, and you probably just have to play the game in a certain way and just try your hardest to ignore all of the awful shit in this game if you want to actually play it. Cause, oh my god. Like, instead of focusing on trying to manipulate players into buying your shitty cosmetics, why can't you just make a good game that people actually want to buy and play? And then maybe add extra content like DLC and skins that are actually good and make sense so that people actually want to buy them. And you don't have to pull all this psychological engineering bullshit just to get people to buy some shitty skin. Like, God, this game is so unserious. I know saying that microtransactions in a way really did ruin gaming. Like, at first they were just an excuse for live service games, because like, oh, the game's free, so, you know, we gotta make money somehow. Whenever you give people an inch, they're gonna take a lot more than a mile. And I think Call of Duty is a perfect example of that. Like, the moment these greedy executives realized that they could make people buy some worthless battle pass and a couple of shitty skins and make the same amount that they would for a full AAA title release, I think that's when the entire industry just got absolutely ruined. Like, whoever made battle passes must have had an Oppenheimer moment. Like, when they released that, I don't know if it was Fortnite that was the first game that ever did it, but man, whoever did that, I hate you. I'm sorry. I really hope whoever came up with that concept has a guilty conscience about it, because the more I think about it, this is such a deep-rooted issue that is simply just never going to go away now, because you make too much money doing it, to the point where it's something that will just never be able to be reversed. And I think that's another reason why we should really appreciate games that came out during the years where the games had to be good for these companies to make money, because now the games don't even have to be good. The skins just have to be kind of flashy, and they have to come up with some kind of system that manipulates you into buying those skins, and they'll make more money than they ever would have making an actual good game that is worth your time and money. And that really sucks. That really sucks. I just kind of wish that they were a bit less shameless about it. Like, why can't you just incorporate cosmetics into the game that actually make sense and feel right? Like, I'm gonna use Counter-Strike as an example again, because like, I know there's a lot of people that don't like skins and don't like the fact that there's literal gambling built into the game, but the system that Counter-Strike has somehow is literally less detrimental to the core gameplay experience, despite literally having gambling, than the systems that Call of Duty has in their games built around cosmetics. And Call of Duty literally makes less money off of their cosmetics and the systems they've created around them that literally ruin their games. Another result of their insatiable greed and unfathomable stupidity is all of their reboots and remasters and sequels just end up becoming shells of their former selves, with the core experience being so lost that any chance at creating an actual fun, memorable, worthwhile experience that doesn't feel tainted is simply no longer a thing. And sadly, I feel like it'll continue to be like that, despite their community screaming at them every year about this. Like, literally, all we want is to play this stupid little arcade shooter and have some fun, but instead we get this engagement optimized plastic psyop of a game that's somehow worse than versions of it that came out literal decades ago, that were, by the way, made with a quarter of the resources that the current games are being made with. Like, what happened to each Call of Duty title having some substance or feeling like it had a soul? What happened to well done simplicity and basic things that made these games worthwhile and memorable? Like a fully fledged campaign, which nowadays feels like too much to ask for, when that's literally what the franchise was built on. Call of Duty was initially focused on campaigns, and I know you have to adapt to the market over time, and that's why they're much more focused on the multiplayer aspect, but campaigns are important, and they were such a core feature of the Call of Duty experience. If I'm paying $70 for a game, I don't just want a multiplayer. I want a fully fledged cinematic campaign experience with replay value, a story that I could actually be invested in, and has details like references and Easter eggs and memorable characters and cool set pieces that make me feel like I'm a part of a historical event or an action movie. And nowadays we either just straight up don't even get a campaign, or we get a campaign experience that is so much of an insult that I would have rather not even having it in the first place. Older Call of Duties had these great campaign experiences that really followed a theme and an aesthetic and really encapsulated what was going on in whatever historical event or world they had built. Those campaigns had an atmosphere that made you feel actually somewhat immersed with the world that they had built. And each one of these campaigns and unique stories and experiences gave each Call of Duty title back then its own unique personality and style. World at War was this gritty interpretation of World War II. Modern Warfare 2 was a really good interpretation of modern conflict that was literally going on as that game came out. And Black Ops 2 was a pretty well executed look into the not so far away future of warfare. And all of that, along with the multiplayer, would come together and form this really coherent image of what this game was. But instead, now we just have campaigns that are just not even worth playing or non-existent altogether, and the rest of the game is just this abomination of whatever just thrown together. And I get it, it's a video game. It doesn't matter that much, of course, but it matters for these products to actually be good. If things don't make sense, and if the game doesn't feel or play or look good, it is simply objectively a bad product. And when I spend $70 and waste a bunch of time and I'm promised a World War II experience or a Cold War experience or a modern day experience, I don't want whatever the hell this is. If I want silly shit, I'll go play Fortnite. That's why that game exists. I'll go dance around and hit the fucking gritty on Peter Griffin and have a blast. I don't play Call of Duty to have that. I get it, they need to adapt to the current market, they need to adapt to the times, but it's pretty obvious that these choices are a lot more of a negative than they are a positive. Yes, there's quicker, easier money, you can sell the silly emotes and skins and whatever, but in the long run, you're alienating most of your core audience that grew up playing these games for a reason. A lot of these people aren't going to come back. I do believe that these choices are its downfall in the long run, and clearly that's already starting to show. And it really is sad to see greed getting the best of another franchise that I grew up really enjoying. No game should ever have some awful system like SBMM or engagement optimized matchmaking. Like, what the hell even is that? These systems are literally designed to deliver a fake gaming experience that simply tries to keep you hooked in a pointless loop of meaningless experiences, all for the hopes that you'll spend a couple more dollars on their plastic game, which in turn just makes people end up feeling so disconnected from the natural matchmaking experience and community feel that these games once had, which eventually leads to the game not even feeling right to play anymore. And I think that's also a pretty big contributor to why current Call of Duty player numbers seem to just drop off of a cliff not long after the game releases. But it genuinely is a pretty sad contrast to the beginnings of this franchise, where community aspects and natural growth were really encouraged by the developers, with them even encouraging things like community modding and community servers, which is so night and day compared to now, where they want you to play the game the way they want you to play the game and keep you hooked instead of just making something that people actually want to play. They are so scared that you're going to get off their game and not buy a microtransaction that they quite literally incorporate systems that psychologically trick you into spending more time and wasting more of your life on their god-awful product. And no matter how good future titles of this franchise are, that's something that I just can't look past anymore. And on the rare occasions that I actually do end up having fun on these games, when I'm reminded that systems like this exist, it almost invalidates my experience. It makes me question if I'm actually even enjoying what I'm spending my time on, which is insane because it's just a video game. Titles in this franchise that released during the era that was still fueled by passion and innovation, which is now long gone, still have somewhat healthy communities, which in my opinion really speaks volumes about how good these older titles actually are. But at the same time, it's also pretty hilarious because a lot of modern Call of Duties are straight up dead. And these games aren't even that old either. A lot of these games are only 2-3 years old. In comparison, games like MW2, COD 4, and Black Ops 2 are over a decade old at this point. And there's more people that enjoy going back to playing those games than there are people that go back and play games like Ghosts, or Infinite Warfare, or Advanced Warfare, or Black Ops 4, or or even Call of Duty Vanguard, which in my opinion wasn't that horrible, even though a lot of people despise that game. But still, those games are pretty recent, and they are supposed to objectively be upgrades to those previous games. Yet somehow, people still prefer to go back and play the older games over those newer titles, which I think says everything you need to know about newer titles that have been coming out in recent years in this franchise. And that's also a reason why I feel like a lot of the efforts and resources and energy that Activision has spent on making new games that they end up abandoning after a year would have been much better spent on a actual proper live service platform game, or just back into older titles that people actually like. But that's also just some delusional fairy tale, because the reality we live in is the one where Activision simply leaves their previous titles that are less than a year old out to rot because they made a new one with a new coat of paint on it with a different number at the end of the title. Modern Warfare 2019 is a perfect example of this. The game has a pretty awful cheating problem and a lot of exploits that are straight up ruining that game. And that game is one of the only decent Call of Duties we've gotten in a long time. But because they already re-released that game with a 2 and a 3 at the end of the title, they're not going to do anything about that. And that game is just going to be left to rot and die. Just like every other previous entry into the franchise that isn't the current Call of Duty that is being developed and updated. And speaking of current Call of Duty, the Modern Warfare 3 reboot getting labeled the worst Call of Duty ever is honestly pretty hilarious, and some much deserved backlash that they've been needing to get for a long time. But I will say, despite that title, there is a decent multiplayer experience buried under all of that garbage, and also the fact that the game was quite literally supposed to be a DLC for the previous title, but instead somehow got released as a full game sold at full price because they made the gunplay and movement slightly better than the Modern Warfare 2 reboot and basically made it what that game should have been, and also gave us a campaign experience that was so bad that I don't even want to talk about it. If anything, they should have pulled the Black Ops 4 with how bad that campaign was. But ultimately, the game as a whole still very much falls flat and is a very, very disappointing release that only further damages the image and name of Call of Duty that has already been dragged through the mud for the last decade. And honestly, the Modern Warfare 3 reboot just kind of feels like Bobby's last lick on the industry on his way out. And now we're kind of left in a situation where most people who are responsible for these games in the first place, and a lot of the best features of them, are not even around anymore. And they've been replaced by people who don't know as much about the franchise and also don't have much of a say in what they do or what gets actually added into the games. Which makes me even more unsure about the future of this franchise. Because even with people like Bobby finally out of the picture, it's hard to feel optimistic about the future of this franchise, because Microsoft isn't exactly known for making games better. And also, not to mention, the people who are replacing everyone who left or got laid off, especially in high positions, don't look to be much better than the people who left. But regardless, I really do hope I'm wrong for the sake of the future of this franchise, because the circumstances that Call of Duty is now being made under are a lot less than ideal. And with the situation that happened over a decade ago and the situation that's currently happening now, that's resulted in most of the people who now work on Call of Duty being new to the franchise, which leaves me feeling kinda conflicted, because on one hand, when we did have all those people there, franchise was good, but it was going downhill pretty quickly. And now that there's a bunch of different people working on the game, there is a chance that it could get better, but there's also a pretty large chance that it only gets worse moving forward. And I honestly feel kind of bad for the devs who still work on this franchise and are actually passionate about the games and care about what they work on. Because, at least from what I've seen, not only do they not agree with what their superiors tell them to do in regards to what gets added and what gets changed in Call of Duty, but also the fact that they don't have much of a say in anything, and they kind of just have to watch as they take part in ruining the franchise that they actually care about, which from what I can imagine is probably not that enjoyable of an experience to take part in. But a job is a job at the end of the day, and a lot of these people have a livelihood that they have to protect. In fact, it's so bad that I've seen an alarming amount of ex-developers who worked on Call of Duty talk about how soul-crushing it is to work in that environment, due to how little freedom or creativity you're allowed to implement input, and also just generally how things are ran by the people in charge at Activision Blizzard, which sadly isn't much of a surprise. I'm sure a lot of us have probably seen all the articles and headlines and tweets about people talking about how awful the work environment is at Activision Blizzard, because the people in charge just want Call of Duty to be this formulaic, soulless, money-printing lobotomy of a game that will pad their profit margins and keep their investors and shareholders happy by any means necessary. But the fact that game-changing decisions always come down to execs who have a business-first approach, who don't even know what's best for the franchise and are extremely out of touch with the community that buys and plays the games, just such an ass-backwards thing that is just such a frustrating reality of a lot of the gaming industry, as it's become infested with venture capital parasites and executives that came crawling out of some other hole in the entertainment industry the moment they saw how much money was in the video game industry, which is even worse in current times after the pandemic due to how much bigger the gaming industry has become. And that, coupled with the fact that Activision are the classic cartoonishly evil corporate overlords that put shareholders first and everything last, is one of the biggest reasons why Call of Duty is the way it is today. But then again, if you are looking at things from simply a business perspective and also thinking short-sightedly about your product with the intention of just getting in and out of the industry, which is basically exactly what's happened to Call of Duty, it makes sense. The franchise got milked for everything it was worth and sucked dry by the vampires at Activision, and subsequently sold off to the Microsoft empire, which gives the complacent morons over at Microsoft an even bigger monopoly over the gaming industry. And this will just simply result in Call of Duty dying a much slower and painful death, just like all the other games acquired by Microsoft. And the one takeaway I kind of got from this whole situation of observing Activision over the years is that they are basically just EA reskinned with slightly better public perception, which really isn't saying much. But they do have a lot in common. They both share the same love for exploiting the creativity and passion of game developers, and also disregarding the people who literally play their games and pay for their products with their time and money. And last but not least, they also love turning game franchises that were actually once worthwhile and somewhat balanced in terms of predatory systems into basically full-blown psyops that are quite literally psychologically engineered and hyper-optimized to extract as much time and money from the poor bastards who make the mistake of buying and playing them. And they also do this in the least transparent and most shameless and convoluted ways possible, all in the name of profit margins and keeping their shareholders happier than their actual player base that literally buys their products, which is pretty ironic, but then again, what isn't in this industry? Anyways, while we're on the topic of Activision being pathetic scumlords, which honestly is kind of the topic of this whole video, the stuff they have been doing in recent years is honestly the kind of shit you only used to see in mobile games, or straight up casinos, or maybe Riot Games. And it's honestly kind of insane that they're, for one, getting away with it, but also the fact that they took this arcade cinematic war shooter based off the Quake engine that was made to simply compete with the Medal of Honor series, and over the course of 20 years turned it into one of the most profitable IPs in media as a whole, which from a business standpoint I honestly respect, even though things could have been done much better. But also at the same time, from a player standpoint, it's quite literally the reason why I no longer buy any new titles, and most likely will continue to not buy any new Call of Duties. And that, combined with the fact that the future of COD is now in the hands of a company mostly known for ruining things and being complacent due to its success and monopoly over the industry, and also the fact that they bought the game in the worst state it's ever been, leaving Microsoft with not much to carry on with. Unlike other game franchises that they've previously purchased like Minecraft or Halo, which all they had to do was carry on, and in the case of Halo, just add a new number to the title. But the problem with Call of Duty is that they've already done that, and for over a decade at this point, which just makes me realize even more how much of a massive win people like Bobby took with selling this deformed dumpster fire of a franchise that's already basically been milked to death, and basically just making it Microsoft's problem now in exchange for $69 billion. So with all of that in mind, I really wish I could say that things don't get worse and the dark times are over now that people like Bobby are finally gone, and we're about to enter a new era where Call of Duty goes back to its roots and the game actually becomes fun again. But the reality is, the Microsoft transition marks a new era with a whole new colossal layer of management and dog shit added to the Call of Duty process, which just means that for decisions to now get made, things will have to play an even longer game of telephone with 100 more layers of convoluted, out-of-touch dickheads down the chain of command, and not to mention how notorious Microsoft is for literally just hiring contractors and freelancers and outsourcing work instead of doing things properly. And all of that combined will likely result in any idea going through all of those layers that may have started off as a good, innovative idea that players would have actually liked to come to the franchise, coming out the other end deformed and mutated, to the point where I'm honestly kind of scared of what's going to be added into future Call of Duties. And once again, I'm sure a lot of us have seen what's happened to franchises like Halo and Minecraft after Microsoft assumed control over those franchises. And Call of Duty is already in a pretty bad spot, so it's kind of impossible for me to be optimistic about the future of this franchise when taking everything into account. And the one takeaway I get from all of this is it really drives home the fact that nothing good lasts forever, especially when it hits this level and it gets this big, which usually ends up with it being sold off to out-of-touch corporates who want to milk it for themselves. We've seen this happen to movie franchises, artists, physical products, and in this case, video games. And the reality is that the quality of a product just so happens to get more convoluted as it garners more success and more people get involved in the process. Which is especially true when you start to involve the wrong people who are just flat out evil, greedy, and extremely out of touch with reality and the product itself and the community around it. And these people basically only get involved because the product has reached such heights that these people who are solely driven by profit simply want a piece of the pie. It's a tale as old as time. The cliche corporate overlords who don't care about anything besides numbers come into an industry that they see potential in and milk the creativity and passion of other people for their own gain, until it's all dried up and there's literally nothing left. And there's not really much that can be done about that because it's just business at the end of the day. And that's just kind of how the world works. And it's also why you should really enjoy things as much as you can before they inevitably run their course and hit this point. And it's also why you should fight for what you actually like instead of settling for less. Remember, they can't do any of this without your time and money. And in my opinion, people should really value themselves a lot more because they deserve better. And if the things you're exchanging your time and money for don't make the exchange feel worthwhile, then try your best to not give them anything. And that, quite literally, is objectively the only way that you can get something better from people who only talk numbers. There's a reason why earlier entries in this franchise were actually pretty decent games, because besides having the original team still around and them actually having creative freedom over their work, they also didn't have a name or brand built up that they could rely on for sales. Which meant they had to build up a name, which was done by creating worthwhile products that made people feel like the experience that they were buying was actually worth their time and money. And they had to prove themselves to earn that from consumers by making good products. And that name and reputation that they built up over the years of making products that were actually worth buying and playing, to the point where there's a large amount of people that will literally buy anything that they put out nowadays, it's allowed them to get away with all these awful business practices that they've been shamelessly incorporating into these games. And all I'm going to say about that is, if you're ever lucky enough to come across something that you actually like and enjoy, whether it be a video game or a show or a movie series or even music, and you manage to catch it during a time when it's still on its come up or even during its prime, try your best to enjoy the moment as much as you can, because it will most certainly not last forever. But regardless of the awful situation Call of Duty has been in for the last decade, and the fact that it's pretty obvious that it won't really be getting any better anytime soon, deep down there's still a part of me that does really miss the days when each new title in this franchise did allow innovation and creativity. I remember every new Call of Duty release for the first decade of the franchise was something special to look forward to. Back then, Call of Duty was the first game I ever went to a midnight release for and actually sat in line for once. I remember waiting for midnight outside that store and getting myself the hardened edition of Black Ops 2. And consumeristic memes aside, that was an experience that I actually vividly remember. But that also was the first and last time I did something like that. And it feels like ever since then, Call of Duty isn't really a game that people really look forward to anymore, at least like they used to. Because now it's just kind of been turned into a yearly disappointment. And it really feels like it's been such a long time since we've had an era where we got consecutive good releases that weren't disappointing. The OG days of this franchise felt like the old Tarantino movies that influenced the whole industry, but the current state of Call of Duty feels a bit more like modern Fast and Furious or Marvel movies, where they're kind of just still going for the sake of money and they just feel very plastic and overly try to cater to the largest possible audience and just throw in as many celebrity cameos and references as possible and water it down to the point where it lacks any substance, soul, originality, or personality, and is just the most unoriginal, consumable, fast food level product possible, which is such a stark contrast to the older games like Black Ops 1 or World at War, which encapsulated such a dark, gritty World War II era and actually managed to innovate despite that genre of game being so oversaturated back then. And it did it so well and stuck to its identity and innovated in so many good ways that people still talk about this game till this day. And it's honestly aged like fine wine. Obviously it's nowhere near perfect and it very obviously has its flaws. But this game has so much personality and substance, and it added so much cool stuff, like for example, zombies, which literally changed the franchise forever. And back then, zombies was actually locked behind completing the campaign, almost like a nice treat or Easter egg from the devs for the people who actually finished the campaign and didn't just run straight to multiplayer. And I remember when I discovered this for the first time back then, it blew my mind and immediately earned my respect for the franchise, which is such a stark contrast to today where the only thing content is locked behind is, of course, a paywall. World at War was unapologetically gritty, creative, and memorable, which is more than I could ever say about any of these so-called World War II Call of Duties we've gotten in recent years that are honestly just a complete joke in comparison to World at War. Another amazing example of this would be everyone's favorite game, Black Ops 2. This game basically culminated an era of Call of Duty, and for a lot of people was the peak of the franchise and also the end of the real golden era of Call of Duty, with things mostly just feeling like they've only declined ever since. I know Black Ops 2 was a bit controversial with a lot of the older fan base because it changed a lot of features that used to be a lot simpler, kind of the same way Halo Reach made the Halo fan base feel, due to both of these games introducing features that kind of strayed from what some people felt like defined these franchises. But looking back, those are also the last two great games in both franchises. Don't get me wrong, I understand where those people are coming from due to the games that came before those titles being a lot more simplistic. But regardless, Black Ops 2 was very much the complete package. Obviously it had its faults, like zombies being pretty bad if you didn't buy any DLC, but overall I feel like it was the peak of this franchise. Black Ops 2 encapsulated a semi-futuristic era, and it did it so well by sticking to its identity and not having too much that was too out of place and messed with the game's identity. It also excelled at all the core gameplay and community features. And it really felt like the Call of Duty community was at its peak around Black Ops 2. And honestly, the only thing I can kind of compare that era to is maybe Prime Fortnite, which is kind of funny when you think about it because Activision in recent years have been so desperately trying to capture the same success that Fortnite has, yet they ignore the fact that a lot of that game's success is attributed to the community aspects, which Call of Duty has completely moved away from, which really goes to show how stupid and out of touch the people running this really are. But the height that this game reached really made it one of the most iconic games in the franchise to date, with the only games coming close to the heights that Black Ops 2 hit being the original Modern Warfare 2 and also COD 4, which were the games that really put Call of Duty on the map on a global scale and paved the way for games like Black Ops 2. And all of those games really felt like objectively well-rounded and complete products that really delivered a holistic gaming experience that defined the Call of Duty franchise. Those games were so memorable and innovative for their times, and every aspect of those games, from campaign to multiplayer to zombies, had so much replay value, which is why there's such a large community of people who still actively play these games and will likely continue to play them into the future. And a lot of newer titles in the franchise are completely abandoned at this point. Even microtransactions in Black Ops 2 were done in a way that kind of felt right. Besides that one instance where a gun was literally locked behind DLC. I don't think they should have done that. But things like just more maps for zombies in multiplayer and more camos that you could buy for a couple of bucks was a form of microtransactions I don't think most people really minded. In comparison to modern Call of Duty, where Activision has basically tried to hyper monetize every inch of the game. And Black Ops 2 also feels like the last time that we truly got something of that caliber from Call of Duty that really delivered a worthwhile experience and also held its place as a cultural icon in gaming and media as a whole. Black Ops 2 had thousands of hours of memorable replay value, which is honestly something hard to find in any game today. Entire careers and massive movements and communities were built around that game, and most people around my age remember Black Ops 2 as the place where it all began for them. And this was thanks to them properly building on their predecessors and innovating in ways which felt like they were in touch with their player base. The Zombies mode that came back from World at War and Black Ops 1 that was literally based in its own universe felt like an entire second game within Call of Duty. Zombies had a story that they stuck to and expanded upon from previous titles, and that cohesiveness and continuity that actually got you invested is something so important and special that we no longer see in modern titles. The way they executed Zombies not only made sense, but most importantly, it made people care, which I can't really say for any modern Zombies modes. And for a lot of people, Zombies peaked in Black Ops 2 and 3, with Black Ops 3 expanding even further upon the experience, and in my opinion, it was the best iteration of Zombies we've ever gotten. And it honestly should have ended there. I know there's people that do enjoy Black Ops 4 Zombies because objectively, yeah, it's still kind of fun, but I also would have been okay with it not even happening in the first place, but that's just my opinion. Newer iterations of Zombies are objectively still kind of fun, but calling them good, especially in comparison to their predecessors, just feels like I'm settling for less. Aside from that, they built something that became a cultural icon in gaming as a whole, thanks to a world and story that was somewhat coherent and kind of made sense as a whole. And that, combined with just a fun gameplay loop that you could honestly play forever, made playing Call of Duty Zombies such a core memory for so many people growing up. Personally, I remember solving Easter eggs with friends, messing around, and going for high rounds as such a core childhood memory of mine. And I haven't really felt anything similar to that experience in any of the current iterations of Zombies. There's honestly more fun to be had in community-made maps on those older games than pretty much anything we've gotten in the last decade in Call of Duty in terms of Zombies. This mode had a gameplay loop and storyline that had millions of people invested at one point, which is honestly crazy in comparison to what it's become now, which is something that doesn't even make sense anymore and is nowhere near as enjoyable to play or be invested in, because they've turned it into some watered down, brainless mode that lacks any depth, personality, or challenge, or even storyline. And it just feels like something they throw in every new Call of Duty title for the sake of a selling point, which has also made it feel pretty oversaturated in the franchise due to it no longer being exclusive to Treyarch games. But then again, what do you expect from Activision? The moment anything does well, they'll find a way to milk it to death. And personally, I knew things weren't going to end well the moment I saw them add Zombies to Advanced Warfare as a paid DLC. And also the campaign experience was quite literally the entire reason why Call of Duty was created in the first place. Call of Duty started as Infinity Ward creating a competitor to Steven Spielberg's Medal of Honor, which was based on his war movies like Saving Private Ryan. And Medal of Honor was created to deliver these cinematic experiences through a gameplay format. And that's what Call of Duty was based on. And it's something that almost feels completely lost in the franchise today, despite it being the whole reason why it started in the first place. And I understand that you have to adapt to the market and evolve over time, but straying this far from your roots and the literal core reason that the franchise even happened in the first place is honestly quite sad, which is why moments like the Game Awards, where Call of Duty got some much deserved criticism, make me kind of happy. Because I know that the people in charge of this game could care less what their community thinks and how much people cry and scream about wanting an actual decent campaign back in Call of Duty, but getting shamed in front of your entire classroom, the Game Awards, especially because of the insult of a campaign that the MW3 reboot campaign ended up being. But aside from that, the campaigns in the last decade of Call of Duty have been disappointing, forgettable, and just straight up non-existent in games like Black Ops 4. And once again, I know I've said this probably like 20 times in this video already, and I'm going in circles, but the fact that games that are literally 10, almost 20 years old now have better campaign experiences and better pretty much everything else than games that come out today with budgets that are near the hundreds of millions and all of the resources that Activision has, and they still somehow manage to make absolute dog shit. I just don't get how things are so backwards. Like, I do get it, but it still just doesn't make sense. Like, surely somewhere along the way within the past 13 years of Call of Duty, they would have realized, hey, maybe we should try to make something decent again and not go in some different direction that nobody asked for and nobody wants. But then again, the logical thing is usually what's not done in the Call of Duty franchise. And once again, it's just astonishing that, was it 2007 when COD 4 came out? Was that 16 years ago? Holy shit, I'm getting old. I'm only like 20. Ugh. Anyways, it's genuinely astonishing that like 16 years ago, we got something as good as the COD 4 campaign, which is a campaign that is still referenced till this day because of how iconic it is, despite being so simple and being made with such little resources. And it is just absolutely insane that a campaign being released 16 years later in our present day, where they can literally use the help of AI and they have billions of dollars to work with, and they can get any A-list celebrity in the game, and they can pretty much build almost anything their heart could desire, and we get something as awful as the Modern Warfare 3 reboot campaign. What? What? It's been 16 years. 16 years. 16. Am I doing the math correctly? 2007. Yeah, it's 16 years. Also, it's like 4 a.m. My brain is not functioning. I can't. 16 years. It's been 16 years since COD 4 and Halo 3 and... and I know this is a Call of Duty video, but speaking of Halo 3, the Halo Infinite campaign is fucking dog shit compared to the Halo 3 campaign. How has gaming regressed this much? The industry is a billion times bigger than it was back then. Gaming was a joke back then. You'd get made fun of for playing video games. There was no famous gamers and billions of dollars getting thrown around and every celebrity and their mother wanting to take part in video games and all that. Like, the gaming industry was a joke 16 years ago. And somehow, now, when it's mainstream and they're making more money than God, they just make the worst shit we've ever gotten. How? What? How is this reality? I don't get it. How did a game that came out in 2007 have a better campaign to this day than a game that came out like a few months ago. We're in 2024. The gaming industry is currently bigger than the movie industry. Call of Duty is one of the largest IPs in media as a whole, and we get the Modern Warfare 3 campaign, and people paid $70 for that game. That's not a joke. What the fuck is this reality that we're living in? How is that allowed? How are they allowed to get away with this shit? I need to process this. I don't get it. I really don't. This is a feeling I've had multiple times throughout researching for this video and kind of like remembering everything about Call of Duty, because I quit this franchise after Infinite Warfare and only kind of like played the new releases here and there. Yes, I still bought them, but I have a combined like 20 hours on the last 10 Call of Duties combined. It's just, I don't make it make sense. I don't understand. How is Activision this brain dead? How are they allowed to get away with this? Why are people paying money for this? I don't understand. I'm gonna lose it. I have to finish this. Oh my god. Anyways, I thought the way things were supposed to work is that you'd get better at things over time and progressed forward. When you've been making basically the same thing for around 20 years, you'd kind of expect that you'd get better at making that same thing over and over. But in the case of Activision, it's almost like they just got worse year after year. The more money they made, things just regressed. I feel like they're missing the memo on something, because we genuinely have just been going backwards this whole time. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care if I'm crazy. Objectively, what I'm saying, at least I feel like, is true. Because I went back and played pretty much every single Call of Duty for the sake of this video, and I had more fun on games that came out in 2012, 2013, 2007 in comparison to games that came out a few months ago. What? Hey man. Shit. I want to go back a bit though. My first experience with Call of Duty was when I instantly fell in love playing Black Ops 1 for the first time at a friend's house. And because of how much I liked the game, I literally begged my parents to get me an Xbox 360, because I didn't really play that many video games before that. I mostly just focused on sports and school and stuff like that. But because of how much I liked Black Ops 1, with that small experience that I had playing the game for an hour or two at a friend's house, I instantly fell in love. And after I got my hands on my first Xbox 360 and played through Black Ops 1 campaign and experienced zombies in the multiplayer, I subsequently bought every single Call of Duty that came out before it and played through all of those games too, which then turned me into a pretty big fan of the franchise. And that was also the point where my life began to go downhill. But the campaign experiences were genuinely something special. From the storytelling to the memorable characters, iconic quotes, and voice lines. Hell, Black Ops 1 voice lines are still stuck in my head till this day, and I can't escape them because apps like TikTok keep reviving all the memes of things like the Numbers Mason and Woods playing Russian roulette and shit like that. And it's just so funny how games like that live on through culture decades after their release, and no one's making memes about the current Call of Duties besides of how dog shit they are, which I think tells you enough. Anyways, back to me glazing old Call of Duties. Memorable characters, iconic quotes, voice lines, Easter eggs, built on such a solid core gameplay feel. This combination of things is something that I still come back to till this day. I still enjoy old Call of Duties. When I feel like playing video games once in a while, I will go and play old CODs because they're so reliable and they still hold up till this day. And I always find myself getting the itch to go back and replay the campaigns or the multiplayer or the zombies of the older Call of Duties. I've even revisited my least favorite Call of Duty in the franchise, Infinite Warfare, because the campaign in that game was actually pretty good. And the robot, Ethan, in that campaign is more memorable than 90% of the characters we've gotten in every single Call of Duty campaign in the last decade, besides like maybe Adler, which is crazy, because we've gotten how many Call of Duties since Black Ops 2 or Infinite Warfare? All Call of Duties. How many games are there? I forgot. There's like 50 or something, including all the ports and all that shit. But yeah, 51 Call of Duties. God damn, that's a lot. Holy shit. Black Ops 2 was the 29th Call of Duty in the series. But that includes a bunch of like ports and like mobile and COD Online and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure. So it was Ghosts, Advanced Warfare, Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare was 2016. God, 2016 was such a crazy year. Let's see, we've gotten 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've gotten like 8 to 10 Call of Duties since Infinite Warfare. And I played through all the campaigns of all those games. And the only character I remember is Adler, and besides that, the robot from Infinite Warfare and the dog from Call of Duty Ghosts. But from every campaign before Ghosts, going all the way down to Call of Duty 1, I actually remember a decent amount of characters from every single one of those games. And I've only played the campaign in some of those older Call of Duties once or twice, and that was like a decade ago. In comparison, I've played the newer Call of Duties not that long ago, and I don't remember a single character. Now maybe I just have Alzheimer's and brain damage, but then again, I remember specific instances from Call of Duty 2 or Call of Duty 4 or World at War, and those games are almost as old as I am. What the fuck? Jesus Christ. But then again, I can't really say I'm surprised because they can't add cosmetics to campaign. So then again, why could they be bothered to make a good campaign experience if they can't sell you skins to wear in the campaign? Maybe that's the next thing they should do. Maybe if we want to get an actual good Call of Duty campaign, we have to allow them to put microtransactions in the campaign where you pay to see the next cutscene or buy a new outfit / operator for the main character of the game, and you can maybe wear like a Peter Griffin skin as the main character for the next COD campaign. Maybe that way they would feel more inclined to give us a good campaign experience because people would be more inclined to spend money on it. Long story short, campaigns in modern Call of Duty are pretty much non-existent or better off not existing. Another thing that's pretty long gone in this franchise that was extremely important to the quality of it was coherence. For example, in older Call of Duty games, everything that was in the game and added to the game mostly made sense. I know Call of Duty games aren't exactly known for being historically accurate, but for the most part, most things in older CODs were at least somewhat coherent to the time period or world that you were set in, which helped add to the immersion and overall feel of the game. And in comparison to modern Call of Duties, which have been reduced to nothing but a nonsensical identity crisis filled with shit like Nicki Minaj running around with dual-wield anime laser guns in a Modern Warfare game, and also the fact that in the World War II games, you can do shit like putting a drum mag on an M1 Garand. Why does this exist? And little things like that a lot of people don't care about, in the grand scheme of things, really take away from the core feel of the game. Because if a game doesn't make sense, and it can't even take itself seriously, and it can't even be unserious in a way that makes sense, the game just ends up feeling like shit, to put it nicely. Fortnite works with being this comical, silly, cartoonish game because that's the world that it's set in. So it makes sense and it works. But for a game that's set in war and set around serious historical events, having shit like this doesn't make sense and just feels very unself-aware and ironic and cringe in a way that doesn't really work well. And most of it just ends up looking like shit straight out of a nightmare that is just beyond cursed. And it really makes me miss the days when Call of Duty was a lot more individualistic and it stuck to its roots and it stuck to its identity, and the games somewhat felt like they made sense. Because back when Call of Duty did that, they were the kid on the block that everyone was trying to copy. And now they're the ones trying to play catch up, but they're like that meme of like, hello fellow kids, and it's just like the weird old creepy guy that just clearly doesn't fit in. Like, Call of Duty built its own lane and then subsequently abandon it and try to fit in with a completely different group because they saw more money there. And the sad part is they did make a lot of money by doing that, which only further validated that awful decision. But despite making all that money, it's very clear that people aren't very happy with this decision. This franchise wouldn't be where it is today, success-wise, without those previous titles and core features that were executed in a way that made these games feel special. And it's sad that they still profit off of people's hope in those aspects making a return. and selling the lie that maybe Call of Duty is good this time, and that they're returning to their roots in an attempt to get people to come back. And the sadder part is people do end up coming back year after year, thinking that this time it might be good, just to be let down time and time again. With the best example being the Modern Warfare 2 reboot, which quite literally did nothing but put a stain on the name of the original Modern Warfare 2, which was actually one of the most legendary games of all time. And that name is now permanently tainted by this garbage. Yet another very important aspect that feels very absent in Call of Duty as of recently is a sense of community, which is something that all of the old Call of Duties used to have because of a lot of the features that I just talked about. And just generally the games being formatted in a way that encouraged player expression. Not exactly that kind of expression, but you know what I mean. Call of Duty used to feel like it encouraged socializing, which created this sense of community and also had an experience that people could collectively be invested in by sharing similar experiences. And back then, those experiences felt like they actually meant something. But now, Call of Duty feels lonelier than ever. And a lot of this is thanks to the game now being designed to shield casual players from any negative interaction that may offend them and cause Activision to lose out on a couple of bucks that those players otherwise might have spent. So now the systems and algorithms around matchmaking don't really so much encourage community or player expression, but more so they just try to encourage you to spend more time on their game and buy their cosmetics. Thanks, Activision. That's definitely the matchmaking experience I want to share with people. It is very enjoyable to have the life sapped out of me and waste my life playing this dog shit game and feel like I'm being pushed towards buying your dog shit cosmetics instead of just chopping it up with the homies and actually having some fun on your dog shit Sorry. And at least to me, a lot of this has just resulted in this franchise feeling like that one friend that you were so close with at one point that has just changed for the worse, and you just don't really want to be around them anymore. Listen, I can understand wanting to stop toxicity, even though that's kind of what the game was built on and what Call of Duty used to literally encourage. But I get it. You want to shield casual players from it, and Call of Duty became too notorious as the game that people trash talked on, and that is not good for advertisements. Okay, cool. But it's also just a poor excuse for what they're doing, since, once again, that's literally what the franchise was built on. I can understand wanting to change your image, but it'd be much better to just lean into it instead of building this franchise around systems that encouraged a certain type of player base and fostering a community like that over the course of the last 15 years or so, and then just turning around and being like, oh, actually, we don't want that anymore. So all of you that played this game and enjoyed it for that reason, go fuck yourselves. But that's kind of what it feels like. The Call of Duty matchmaking experience isn't supposed to be some single player daycare that saps the life out of you. It's supposed to be this kind of social hub for bantering with people and letting it out after a long day of work, and also creating rivalries and trash talking and building storylines with entire lobbies of people. That is what made the multiplayer experience in Call of Duty special. And honestly, the last time I got a glimpse at Call of Duty kind of feeling like that was during the prime time of Warzone during the pandemic, and also when we had proximity chat. And for a little bit there, things were kind of back, and it did feel like Call of Duty was taking steps in the right directions, even though they were still just trying to copy everyone else like Fortnite. But at least the game felt alive and it felt fun. And subsequently, that time didn't really last long, as the pandemic ended and not as many people were playing anymore. And also the fact that Warzone just got worse and wasn't as fun anymore. And that short period of time where it felt like Call of Duty was taking steps in the right direction was also very short-lived, as everything they've done since then has done nothing but stray further and further from things that made these games enjoyable social hubs. And things really just feel like they've only gotten worse. And because of the way that matchmaking is literally designed now, and the fact that lobbies break up, makes people not really want to invest their time into socializing with people that'll be gone in a few minutes. If anything, it just makes interactions in lobbies currently just a lot more weird and passive-aggressive and kind of toxic. And not in like the fun way, because we're going to be together for a couple of matches and we can actually trash talk, but more of in a, I'm not going to see you again in a few minutes, so I'm just going to kind of be an asshole to you and not really care kind of dynamic. And because lobbies don't stay together, people are just a lot less inclined into actual conversations. And this, coupled with the fact that everyone's on Discord now and SBMM is awful, it just makes the social aspect of the multiplayer experience generally pretty unenjoyable. And once again, it's kind of funny that it's this bad because they've invested so much in all these psychological tactics into trying to get people to spend more money and make people less toxic and whatever. But it's only resulted in the experience just becoming more and more awful, which also as a result makes them less money. Because if people aren't enjoying their time on this game, why would they feel inclined to spend money on something they're not even going to play for longer than 2 or 3 months? Which also goes back to my point of how backwards this whole thing is. When are they going to realize that if they just got rid of all of that bullshit, the game would be a million times better and people would be inclined to spend more money? But these greedy morons just can't think straight and are so out of touch with their community and their product that they don't even realize this. And that's exactly why Call of Duty is in the state that it's in now. And with how bad things are, it makes me appreciate the days when I could just get anyone on my team even more. Back when matchmaking was mostly connection based and each lobby was a unique experience that led to some of my most memorable experiences in gaming as a whole, because you never knew what you were going to be in for each time. And this, coupled with the fact that lobbies could stay together and you didn't get punished for doing a bit too good in a game or two, and matchmaking just generally felt a lot more casually enjoyable, created such a memorable experience. I've had some of the funniest conversations of my life at 2 a.m. in a Black Ops 2 Search and Destroy lobby. And if I ever wanted to actually try, you had things like League Play, which created this perfect balance of the people that actually took the game seriously and wanted to actually try, went and played ranked. And the people that just wanted to play with everyone and just have casual fun and talk to people and run around and just play the game normally, could just play normal matchmaking. That's how things should have stayed. I know there's ranked in newer Call of Duties, but SBMM should not be in normal matchmaking. That is one of the biggest mistakes in modern gaming. And a lot of other games continue to make this mistake, and it's so disappointing to see when clearly a majority of the player base does not want this.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense. We're literally in pred lobbies. Like, there's no way this is how ranked is supposed to be. There shouldn't be a hidden MMR inside of ranked. What the fuck is the point of ranked if there's a hidden MMR? It just doesn't make sense. It's like skill-based matchmaking in public games. Why the fuck would you have skill-based in a public game?
Stop shoving SBMM down our throats. We don't want this bullshit. And it's such a large reason that contributes to so many people quitting these franchises entirely. If anyone that works on these games is watching this and you want to make money, remove SBMM from normal matchmaking. Keep that to the ranked playlists. No normal player wants SBMM. That shit is garbage. If you want to play against equally skilled players and be competitive, go play ranked. That's why that game mode exists. I'm honestly convinced that the only people who actually enjoy SBMM and current Call of Duties and most current games as a whole are the people who just glitch into bot lobbies where all the precious casual players are so they can record their high kill gameplays and get nukes and shit like that. Because pretty much every single normal person who I've asked about SBMM absolutely hates it. And it's such a universally agreed upon thing that SBMM is bad that it's honestly hard to believe that they keep putting this into these games. And people have been complaining about it for years now, and they still do nothing about it. In fact, Activision didn't even want to acknowledge its existence in the first place, which is such a hilarious, gross lack of transparency. You're trying to gaslight your player base into thinking that SBMM isn't real. Do you think we're that stupid? Like, the whole goal of a product like a video game should be to make the customer satisfied with their exchange of time and money. I know that's something that doesn't really apply in today's market, especially in regards to the AAA industry that have gotten so complacent because they're simply too big to care, such as Call of Duty. The fact that people that literally give you your time that they can't get back, and on top of that, they give you their hard-earned money, have to scream and complain and cry just to play your game makes zero sense. I get they don't care about player numbers and player experiences because they know that people will buy and play their games regardless. That, by the way, would be a lot more beneficial for them to care about, especially in the long run. But then again, that's the logical thing, which Activision doesn't give a single shit about because they're just gonna pump out a new title in a couple of months and abandon the previous one, and people will come running to them, money in hand, ready to pay another $70 to $100 for the same dog shit with a different coat of paint on it and a different number in the title of it. But it's gotten to a point where this format has been so exhausted and they've recycled literally everything. I mean, they're even recycling game names now. Like, why do we have a Modern Warfare 2 and a Modern Warfare 3 in current day? Those games came out a decade ago, and these aren't remasters. These are just shitty reboots that shamelessly capitalize on nostalgia. And this really goes to show how little they give a shit, which in a way I kind of respect. They're so brain dead and they care so little, and they just keep becoming worse and worse, but people just keep throwing money at them, so why should they care? Anyways, fast forward to present day, Microsoft now owns Call of Duty. And who's to say they won't just take their turn milking this franchise for everything it's worth and pushing the boundaries of how much bullshit they can get away with. Maybe even trying to go farther than Activision did, which might finally end up killing this franchise once and for all, just like they did with my childhood favorite, Halo. But who can really blame them? They're not gamers, they're just business people. And to them, as long as someone's buying the product, they'll keep pumping regardless of how their community feels. And all I can really say about that is it's not going to change. So if you're one of those people who is also kind of upset about it and still just kind of buys the games just to buy them, do yourself a favor and stop giving your time and money to a franchise that doesn't value your time or your experience in that exchange. And go spend your time and money on some other game franchise or literally anything else that's actually worth your time, that you actually enjoy and aren't just buying to buy. And if enough people do that, that actually hurts their bottom line, which in turn might lead to them actually being forced to make a somewhat decent game again one day. But that'll only really happen if a majority of people just straight up stopped buying their games. Which sounds kind of crazy, but after what they've been doing recently, I wouldn't be that surprised. But then again, if that does happen, all they have to do is just pull the nostalgia card again. And who knows what Microsoft is willing to do. Last time we had a situation like that, where the community collectively came together and said, we're not playing this garbage, they remastered COD 4. And shamelessly bundled it with Infinite Warfare, which completely ruined the chance of actually getting a properly remaster, and also simultaneously desecrated the game that literally put this franchise on the map. Which really shows that the scumbags at Activision are willing to sink as low as they have to go. They're such sore losers that instead of just taking the L, learning from their mistakes, and making a better product, they dangle that nostalgia carrot in front of their player base and say, hey, you want to relive the old days? Here's a shitty remaster of a game that we threw together to save sales numbers. And who's to say that that won't happen again? Because they have quite a few games that they haven't remastered that they could do that with. We haven't even gotten a multiplayer for the MW2 remaster, because I'm pretty sure that they know that if they did that, most people would probably just go play that instead of the new dog shit that's currently out. But it genuinely does suck how little they care about preserving their iconic games and honoring them with proper remasters, which so many people would have loved. And this also goes with the last topic that I want to whine about in this video, which is the fact that we didn't even get proper remasters for the original Call of Duties during the entire run that Activision had before they sold out to Microsoft. And I'm not sure if we'll ever end up getting those remasters. It's also pretty obvious that they probably don't want to do that in the first place. A remaster seems more like a nostalgia trump card that they play whenever they feel like it or when they feel like they need to, instead of actually honoring the games that put them on the map and giving us a proper set of remastered games. They'll probably just bundle them here and there and toss one out whenever one of their new games isn't performing too well, kind of like they did with Infinite Warfare. And also, I've heard some rumors that apparently we might be getting some form of Black Ops 2 remaster, or some things from Black Ops 2 being remastered in the Call of Duty that's coming 2025, which I heard is actually a direct sequel to Black Ops 2. Which I thought we were done recycling, but I guess not. And it also kind of makes sense because I'm sure they saw how much money they printed when they made the Modern Warfare 2 reboot, despite that game being awful, but because of the nostalgia, it sold like crazy. If anything, Black Ops 2 is generally more popular than Modern Warfare 2. So it kind of makes sense that they picked that game to remaster and recycle from and continue to bank on nostalgia. Now, as someone who is a pretty big Black Ops 2 fan, it's hard to not be at least a little bit excited about this, but I'm most definitely not going to pre-order this game, and I'm most definitely not going to buy it at release, because I've been disappointed way too many times at this point, and I don't care what name they slap on that new Call of Duty to try to bait me in with nostalgia, they are not going to get my money unless this game is an actual, proper, well-rounded product that is an experience that's actually worth my time and money. Because I learned my lesson with the Modern Warfare 2 reboot. I regret buying that game, and I don't really feel like making the same mistake anymore. But getting back to the topic about remasters, it's genuinely pretty sad that they just didn't really care much about the history of their franchise and didn't really care much to preserve it through proper remasters, but I still have a little bit of hope and delusion. And that kind of leads to my only point that I'm kind of hopeful about with this whole Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard and the entire Call of Duty franchise, which is the fact that Microsoft is actually pretty good at preserving their games, unlike Activision. And there's a pretty high chance that they're going to end up cleaning up and fixing a lot of the older Call of Duties for things like Game Pass. And also simply because it's a no-brainer as a business decision if they want to make a return on investment after purchasing this entire franchise. Because we've already seen Microsoft do stuff like this with their games, with things like backwards compatibility and things like the Master Chief Collection for Halo. And it kind of just makes sense for them to get these older Call of Duty titles up and running because people will go back and play them and buy them if they're actually playable and fixed. And not to mention, it would also be a massive addition to Game Pass, which is currently Microsoft's main baby in gaming. And as of the time that I'm recording this, I actually just saw on Twitter that they fixed some things in Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2, which is really cool because, in my opinion, those are some of the best games in the entire franchise, and it would really be a shame if they were just left to rot and die, because they still have so much replayability, and I'm sure that a lot of people would love to go back and play Black Ops 1 and 2, but those games are just filled with so many issues and have such a large cheating problem that a lot of people just can't even go back and play those games for nostalgia. And I know that if they fixed those things, a lot of people would go back and play those games religiously. And I don't know why Activision didn't do this in the first place. I understand they want people to play their newer titles, but people will play the same game for their entire life, as we've seen with Counter-Strike or Halo or Minecraft or even RuneScape. People find one game that they really connect with and they actually like, and that will be their hobby and their escape and their game that they play for the rest of their life. Not everyone wants to play the newest title or play the next game. Like, for example, I'm happy still just playing Black Ops 2 and Halo 3 till this day. And if CSGO was still around and they didn't delete it at the release of CS2, I would still play that game over CS2. I don't hate new games, I just prefer the older ones. And I don't think people that don't want to play the new ones should be forced to play those games. So this move by Microsoft to attempt to preserve the older Call of Duties, in my opinion, is a huge positive for the franchise, and something that I think a lot of people are going to be very happy about. And I really do believe that if this acquisition didn't happen and it stayed under Activision, the death of the Call of Duty franchise was pretty much guaranteed. But now that it's under Microsoft, it'll obviously live on longer because, well, they need to make a return on investment, but they're also is a decent chance that they just keep releasing garbage every year for $70. But if they do end up going with that option, I'm pretty sure that Call of Duty wouldn't really live on for that much longer, because this franchise is at such a point that if it doesn't actually reinvent itself, it'll probably die a slow, painful death and finally be put out of its misery once and for all. But I hope that doesn't happen, and I hope that Microsoft somehow brings it back and we get another era of Call of Duty that we can all enjoy. Anyway, if you somehow enjoyed this video, which no you didn't, I'd really appreciate a sub and maybe stick around, because I'll be making a lot more of these, and trust me, they will be getting a lot better than this one, because this was quite literally my first attempt at ever making something like this. Anyways, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.